Any person could put the spirit, the sweet, as it were, and the bitter together to make a balanced cocktail, so they say. What's more intriguing is to create a drink that tells a story, that resonates somehow with what you've learnt about a person, or about some mythology, or about a feeling. That's much harder to achieve, so it's a real challenge.
Welcome to the Lush Life podcast. I'm your drinking companion, Susan Schwartz, and I bring you the how-to guide for living life one cocktail at a time. Thanks to my mother's love of martinis, the first words I spoke were shaken, not stirred, and I've been obsessed by cocktails ever since. Together, we'll learn from bartenders, brand ambassadors, distillers, and others why certain drinks are popular in certain cultures, how to make the perfect old-fashioned, when to shake and when to stir, and so much more. Hear that sound? It's time to cozy up to the bar and let the fun begin. It all sounds so romantic. Stories of food, drink, love, and intrigue. I was transported back to the days of old as soon as I entered Courtesan in Brixton. Our guest today, Hammant Patel Villa, tells a good yarn. He also makes a mean cocktail. Where do his ideas come from? You have to listen to find out.
Quite simply and naturally, it comes from the history of dim sum. So dim sum originated in the royal courts of China 1500 years ago, and when investigating its origin within the courts, what came out was the history of the courts themselves, and that they were basically run and oiled socially by courtesans. So the original terminology for a courtesan simply means lady of the court, as a courtier, as a man of the court. It's then taken on lots of meanings in our modern world, but when looking at the original histories, especially of China, you just realized that these women were incredibly important, ran the way the courts operated in a very hospitable, intelligent, clever, but slightly, how can I say, I didn't want to say Machiavellian, but in a way that they were looking out for their own interests. So you can imagine a courtesan would have been someone trained for that position from birth. So she would have had to know all the languages of the empire, have often a really well-grounded education in the arts, things like poetry, calligraphy, dancing. These are the things that we think of Royal China, but sometimes other facets required within the empire, because these women often represented great powers, so maybe noble families, maybe whole regions, and they had access to the emperor and made things happen. So the whole culture of food and drink and hosting and being the utmost host as well. These women had fineries the world has unfortunately lost, and taken to a level we'll never see again. And so it became, the courtesan itself became not just a place where you eat and drink. It became a place of adventure where you could touch the beauty and fragility of these women and enjoy that form of hospitality, and also have an adventure in the food and drinks, just as any empire would have had, but especially the Chinese empire.
And one of those treats was dim sum?
Well, yes, dim sum means to touch the heart. It's not a food. It's an attitude. So if you're a chef cooking for the emperor and empress, they're living gods, and you had 400 chefs with you cooking for the court, your task was to be ingenious, to come up with new foods all the time. So true dim sum is the incredible food you've never had. So as soon as you get a menu which you have every week, end on end, then it's not dim sum anymore. So most dim sum restaurants should just remove that from their title.
So it was the surprise inside?
Absolutely, the adventure. So for instance, many people think steamed dumplings are dim sum. It's not. I've just told you it's an attitude. So the Chinese at the time created many of the cooking techniques we know now. So some of the techniques, obviously, steaming is the obvious one, but even deep frying, baking techniques, how to gain texture within certain foods, have affected Europe. So I will state this. All northern Italian cooking is a direct descendant of dim sum. So pasta itself, tortellini, tortelloni, cannelloni, lasagna, are essentially Italian reworkings of dim sum. So that great trading tradition of northern Italy, where they'd go and take these incredible foods from the East, especially China, along with the silks and other goodies like porcelain, bring them back to North Italy, trade with the rest of Europe, and then the Italians reworked these amazing dishes their own way, utilising local ingredients. So in Brixton, for instance, our dim sum should reflect what we have in our modern world. Some modern ingredients, maybe we have reworkings of Italian Gujarati dishes, West Indian dishes that start putting back that methodology, the idea that dim sum should be creative, ingenious, touch your heart, get you engaged and make you feel like you're having an adventure through the meal, as opposed to just filling yourself and being content with that.
Now, were you the one who came up with this concept?
It's difficult to say yes, because it's almost, as I said, it's quite natural. So when going through this whole process, it's not as if I suddenly came up with an idea and said, "Oh, I must do this." All I did was contextualize the history and say, "Well, we must do this because it's there. It's part of the history." So, for instance, Fern, our female head chef, when I asked her about, why there's so few women in dim sum, she said, well, there was always women in dim sum. It's just in modern times, when cooking got really big for thousands of people, they felt it was almost agricultural, that you had to be a big, strong, tough, hairy man to be able to mix, do these foods at speed, etc. So, but dim sum was prepared by women. And it's not a southern Chinese thing. It is to do with the Empire of China. We know it in the UK through the little colonial outpost known as Hong Kong. So we were able to trial it from there. But honestly, the Hong Kong menu is a very poor reflection of the original dim sum. And equally, Hong Kong has set rules that are just ridiculous, like dim sum has to be eaten on Sundays in the morning. It's total rubbish. Dim sum is a food to touch the heart. You can have it with tea if you want. You can have it with wine if you want. There are court documents that show that the Chinese would trade with Persia, this is 1,000 years ago, to get their wines, because they were the finest wines on earth, to be taken to the royal courts to eat with dim sum. So, there's an immense history to what all the empires, I suppose, have handed down to us. So here we have the Roman Empire and which were direct descendants of. But the trade with the UK, for instance, in the 1800s with China has given us things that we think are English, like bone china. The English couldn't make bone china. They stole the idea from the Chinese who've been doing it for years. Or the silks that we see in Italy, and it came from China, obviously. And they robbed the little worms to take back to Italy, to put in the trees, to make silk ties and things like that. But the importance of China in our cultural identity, in North Italy, I've just said, it is North Italy, but even in the UK with design and so-called English China, all coming from China, hence the name. So there's a lot of, I think part of the story of me choosing this is not, I wish I could say it was I'm the genius behind, but it's not. History already tells us the importance of these people, and I simply had to do it.
Well, once you had the idea of food from the heart, did it just bleed right into the cocktails and the wine? And that idea, and that's why you decided on an all-female
wine list and spirits listing. No.
I see.
No, that goes...
I always love a surprise too.
Yes. No, because that... All right, so we've now established the importance of the role of women within the courts. Mm-hmm. What then happens is that there are the four great beauties of China who dominate the kind of cultural history of China. So, for instance, in England, we have men in tights throwing bows and arrows at each other, and then we go, oh, King Arthur and Robin Hood and all this and that forms part of the British cultural identity. In China, they've got these 4 great beauties of China, and it's that, I suppose, glorified view or dreamscape that we create as our background to our lives. So different cultures have different things, or dragons or whatever, but the Chinese do have these 4 women that are very, very important. And so when you have these definitions given, then the courtesan became all about female talent and the courtesans themselves. So if we're now establishing a business based on female talent, and we want you to see the fineries of China, to avoid the female angle would be ridiculous. So let's just look at it honestly and say, well, if we're now doing dim sum that's very female orientated, the concepts are very adventurously female, surely the wines and spirits should follow suit. And then what's come from that has also, helped redefine us as well. So in starting that journey, as with any journey, you then find new things, new opportunities, and new visions, new panoramas, and it just proved, in effect, a rolling ball that proved the direction was not just right, but natural. It is what it should be.
It's such a male-dominated industry,
yes.
Drinks,
yes.
On the whole. Were you ever frustrated? Incredibly.
And unfortunately, I could really go on about this. However, let's make this really simple, okay, in as best as I can. It is a crying shame. The lack of women in our industry is something that we should all cry into our tea about. It is absolutely revolting that out of all the industries I know, and this includes IT has a percentage of about 18 to 20% female in the industry, in IT. And now there are more coming in, but they're still not taking core roles. It's more of the HR and things like that. Fine. Okay. When it comes to our industry, behind the bar, all we see is bearded beta males, pretending that they understand drinks, pretending that they know their product, pretending that they know what they're doing. In effect, they're there for a lifestyle and not for the core values of a good bartender, which is all to do with the theatre, the beauty of the drink, giving someone a fascinating experience that they can take home with them, that they can't even do at home. And I think the fact that women are not in the industry means that that's the case, that we have, I think, quite a poor representation of what we can achieve. And I'll prove this scientifically as well. Okay? So this is not just me spouting because now we're some kind of female-led feminist view of the world. All right? Let's look at it in another way. Have you heard of super tasting? So super tasting is the ability that some people have where they naturally are able to taste things that seem to be so minute, a bit like sharks, blood in the water. So I have a friend, she was able to tell every brand of tea. Just pick up you make her 20 teas, she'd pick them up, blind taste and tell you exactly where they're from. Even Tetley's versus PG Tips versus all the supermarket brands, just go through them all. Just knows them as if it were colours. I can't do that. Most people can't do that. So apparently, scientists reckon there's different viewpoints. Some simply say, women have more taste buds. It's not true. Some scientists say, or some research has shown that 10% of men are super tasters and 30% of super tasters are women. 30%. Why would that be? So there's 3 potential reasons that resonate the most. The first is evolutionary. So women have children, and therefore the woman is the barrier between the child and the world. So she's the one that tastes things for the child. So if she's going to sniff a mushroom or a bad piece of meat or some fruit that's gone off, she's the barrier to say, no, that will affect my child, it will be sick, it's not going to have it. So that's an evolutionary process. So that's evolution saying, if women don't do this, the human species dies out. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that's evolutionary. The second is adaptive. So the adaptive process is that women, in having that first role, are around food much more than men. Okay? So that means that they cook, they're actually palpably holding the food, cooking with it, understanding it, seeing the textures, all these types of things. They're just around it all the time. The adaptive process is much shorter than the evolutionary one, according to our miserable understanding of the world as it exists. So even within a generation, a person can adapt to the environment. The easiest thing is just go somewhere sunny, your skin will get darker. That's an adaptive process. It is built in, but that's adaptation. It's something already built in. And over generations, you will gain physical attributes that mold to the environment. So if you move to Alaska in 30 generations, your actual skin and your eyes and your nostrils will change to that environment. That's adaptive. So women are adapted to taste foods more. Okay? The last one is that God simply made women that way. Yes? So women have this. Now, let me go back to that 30-10. Okay?
Yeah.
If 30% of women are super tasters and 10% of men, that means 75% of all winemakers, spirit makers, food tasters should be women. It's obvious. And bartenders. And chefs. But our industry, chefs and bartenders, are dominated by men who are not super tasters. They don't even taste what they're doing. But I'm going to go back to that because I have a beef with the science behind this, because I've given exceptional views on why women have more ability than men. It doesn't make sense. Surely it should be 100%, isn't it? So why isn't it 100%? The main reason I can see is to do with framework. And it's that if you're a super taster, for instance, how would you know?
I guess you'd have to test it out somehow.
Exactly.
Right.
And what's the reference for that?
Working in the industry or just being around food.
Well, no, because you've still got no reference. Even if you can super taste, you still need a reference. So, for instance, have you tried all the spices? Do you understand the difference in cooking times and how it affects the aromas and the flavours? Have you seen all the models and mapping of taste alignments? You know, do you understand the difference between cereal aromas? And that's a study. That has to be studied first. So you need the framework to then be able to talk about it.
So it's not just you have two different teas and realize one day, oh, I can tell Tetley from PG Tips.
You need to know
that.
So you have to focus on the food or the drink, actually probably with someone who's training you, and to say, can you taste that? Can you taste that slight elderflower taste? And you're like, well, I've never tried the elderflower. Okay, here's elderflower. Right. Taste that. Put it in your memory. You know, get the reference point. That is now elderflower. Anytime you try elderflower in future, you have that reference point, you can do it. Now, there are a plethora of tastes and spices and fruits, etc., that you can go through to analyse, to create a library that allows you to be a super taster. Yes? So you could be, and probably are, a super taster.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Unfortunately, I know
I'll have to try it with bourbons, set them all up and see if I can close my eyes and taste the difference between each one.
I'm not sure you'll arrive at super tasting at the end of that.
It's just honing, the little bit of honing and honing and honing. Now, I have a question.
Go on.
When you were studying industrial design, right?
Yes.
Had you any idea that you would know all of this? Was it something that interested you?
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's go back again. I've been very, very lucky in my life to have been brought up in Brixton with an Italian mother and an Indian father in Brixton. That means all my aunties and uncles were from everywhere in the world, especially the Caribbean, West Africa, South America. My actual aunt is South America, but my aunties, let's say, growing up in the UK, were from everywhere. The States, really English, chefs, you name it. A lot of dancers, actually, and people who are quite amazing. So, as a family, we grew up with the world. We tried everything. My mum is an exceptional chef and cook. So, therefore, you grow up in an environment that is very creative, that has every culture to try and taste and become part of. It's not as if we're, these strange outsiders that go and eat at a West Indian restaurant and then claim we understand West Indian cooking. No, we grew up with people who are West Indian that we thought of as family, eating West Indian food, understanding West Indian food. Therefore, I feel part, growing up in Brixton, that culture is also my culture. People might argue with that, but that's the way it is. And same with my Italian family, or my Gujarati family, or my African. My father was born in Africa. He's never been to India, so he considers himself an African. And so when I eat African food with my African friends, and my best friend was from Nigeria, and I used to call his mother mummy, because that's what Nigerians do. So to have all of that means that you have an experience of food and culture that is Absolutely. Vast. Mm-hmm. So coming into industrial design was more to do with, I have now all this, let's call it a library of experience, and I wanted to innovate with it. So my core calling is not industrial design, it's not product design. I find it easy to come up with new ideas for products and foods and drinks, because I have a background of lots of crazy people and lots of diverse people feeding me, in effect, lots of information about things that I now know that other people don't have. So for us it's natural, and now I'm very appreciative, but at the time it's kind of, this is life.
So you always knew going into your degree that you wanted to come back to food and drink?
No, I think I love food and drink. We are known, I say we because me and my brother, there's a little bit of it, we are known to be able to eat properly and really enjoy our food. So we'd be invited by our aunties to eat, and they'd watch us eat because we would love food so much. And so it's not the fact that I knew I'd come back to it, it's more that I know I love it. And so for instance, I find making drinks, I really enjoy it. For some reason, I find it very easy to put things together when it comes to drinks. In food is the worst thing you could ever get me do. I'm the worst chef you could imagine. I get angry.
It's a good thing we're talking about drinks today.
And the whole reason is I get so frustrated because I can't achieve what I want to. I can't get the flavours. I'm not skilled enough for the cooking times and and then there's like our kitchen here, or my mother, or some of my family who just they seem to be able to have, I don't know, the divine touch. They touch anything and it's amazing. Me, it's a journey into hell. I descend into hell when I cook because I cannot do what my taste buds want, or I want to achieve, or the colours, the textures. I just can't. Whereas drinks I can.
Then what brought you back round to it after you finished your degree?
I think it was, there's a long story in between. I've ended up doing quite a few things, so design, and I was one of the first people to come up with the idea of social media because of innovation. And I chased money for 10 years and went around the world begging. It didn't work out the way I wanted it to, and then see basically spotty American teenagers get a load of money for very poor products, like Facebook, like Twitter, if I can get that out. Just rubbish. And here in London we came up with many things that still outclass them by a huge amount. But the problem with Britain is that it doesn't have the same view of encouraging small businesses and the same availability for cash, unless you're part of the aristocracy. You just don't. It's much harder for us in Europe. But it's been a great journey. We did lots of work around Europe and consulted for some governments and things like that on communications. So I've had an interesting experience travelling around, etc. And one day, because you're always on the cusp of being a billionaire, I have to say that when you're dealing with this kind of IT environment and you can see what you can achieve and etc. And just one day I just realised I had no life because I was just flying everywhere. So between Italy, Spain and New York and London, I was just going back and forth, and I had no life. It was the worst life you could imagine. No friends, living in hotels, meeting people you didn't like, very wealthy people who I didn't like, politicians and such. And then I just remember flying to Italy for a signature, and I thought, this is the worst life I could imagine for myself. And when I came back, a friend of mine said, what are you doing, Hammant? And I said, well, I've just closing down this business. I've had enough. I was with partners. There's we had all these fingers in different pies, and I was just cutting them off as it were. And it was a hard decision, but I had to take it because I couldn't cope with that lifestyle, the never-ending lifestyle. And I thought, he said, come and be a builder with me. So I went, okay. So we did development, we were building lots of things, and we had a team, again, here in Brixton with lots of different people, Polish and Bulgarians and Italians and Spanish, but also Chinese, lots of Chinese people. And obviously I've grown up with Chinese people as well, because that's part of Brixton. Mm-hmm. And my when I was in industrial design, a good friend of mine, Casey Lowe, his father owned Wonkies, which is a very big famous restaurant in Chinatown, and we would eat there every Friday, and then we'd go to dim sum every Friday and every Sunday, and all this other stuff. I think
you're the best fed person I've ever interviewed.
Well, I think you can see that in my waistline.
No.
My butt's not so bad, if you want to have it.
I want to eat with you.
So, with my Chinese team, one of them kept on saying, let's open a dim sum restaurant, because my wife's a dim sum chef, and I was saying, never should you open a restaurant. And he would say, why? And I said, I have family who are restaurateurs, and every restaurateur will tell you, as I tell you today, look into my eyes, never open a restaurant. Never open a restaurant, right? If you want to experience opening a restaurant, yes, for 5 minutes, I will take you somewhere quiet and just beat the hell out of you, right? Physically harm you for 5 minutes. And just imagine that every day for the rest of your life, working life, just getting beaten up. So, it's the one thing. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I heard.
Did you understand? You're not saying, yes, I will not open a restaurant, but do not open a restaurant. Okay, so I told this to my so-called friend. I said, no, I have learnt from people far cleverer than me that you should never open a restaurant, because they're restaurateurs and they tell about the hell that it truly is. But for some reason, that's what they do. They're still there. They can't get out of it, because once you're in, you can't get out. And they say, don't open a restaurant. And I believe them. And he did this for about a year. Let's open a restaurant, a dim sum restaurant.
And you gave him the same story each time. I'm going to beat you up.
That's right. And
and then
one day, he said to me, I tell you what, how about this? We open a restaurant, but you just do the front of house, you do the cocktails and the design. And I'll do the rest of it. The kitchen, the service, all the things that, you've been telling me not to do. Because he's a restaurateur, he comes from a restaurant background, his wife's a dim sum chef. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know what? There's nothing more in the world I'd love to do than do cocktails. It's like that. It's one of my favourite things, isn't it? You're creative, it's very fast. You get to try all these alcohols, you get to learn a lot. There's a lot of history behind these drinks, and I enjoyed that history. And so we agreed to create a partnership, and we span around London trying to find a venue until we found this one in Brixton, and it just resonated that, hey, hang on, it's in Brixton, it's on the front line. It's a lovely space. It was in absolutely terrible condition. It was just horrible. It was properly horrible, and it'd been lots of things, and it'd been vacant for a couple of years, and really not unlooked after. And I thought, this is what we do: we build, we design. It'll be amazing. We can do lots of research. We went off to China. All these kind of things, the excitement of a new project, and so I opened a restaurant. And
hopefully you don't feel like you're getting beaten up every single day.
That hasn't stopped. You get used to it.
Oh.
We humans can get used to any kind of abuse and think it's normal after a while.
You're numb.
Yes, numb from the beating.
But let's talk about making the cocktails, the positive part. So how did you go in? You had, I'm going to make cocktails.
Well, I think... See, that's obviously where the love comes in as well. So with the cocktails, again, it was quite simple. I took the stories out of China, the things that really intrigued me, and built a cocktail around it. So every cocktail that we did for ourselves has a story. And even the cocktails that we have elsewhere Say the Hanky Panky, for instance. Hanky Panky, brilliant drink, 1904, 1906, Ida Coleman, head bartender at the Savoy, so a female head bartender at the Savoy, creates a drink for a lovey who comes in and says, make me a drink, Ida. And she makes this incredible naughty drink called the Hanky Panky, which actually has this really vicious Victorian dark flavour and very difficult to drink. And then we just, with that kind of story, it's easy to adapt it to Brixton. We put raspberries in, made it even naughtier than Ida. I'm sure she'll be very proud of Ada Coleman. She'll be very proud of us, what we did with it. And it's a little story that any bartender could do. But what we did, or what I discovered, is that the stories of Royal China and the courtesans are really intriguing and really make you think. So some of our cocktails have stories that would take half an hour to an hour to go through, because they're really pulling at the ancient mythology and legends of these women. And so to create a drink around that becomes really exciting, because all of a sudden you're not just creating... Any person could put three, the spirit, the sweet, as it were, and the bitter together to make a balanced cocktail, so they say. What's more intriguing is to create a drink that tells a story, that resonates somehow with what you've learnt about a person, or about some mythology, or about a feeling. That's much harder to achieve. So it's a real challenge, and that's where the cocktails, I feel, that we excel, is that our cocktails have this element of storytelling, and therefore, hopefully, the client will be able to get a resonance with that and engage with the drink in a different way to somewhere else, where it just looks pretty or tastes great or comes in a fabulous glass. This is more than that. And some of our drinks touch on the mortality, they touch on religious experience, they touch on druggery or historical aspects of trade and things like that. And especially on the beauty and fragility of let's say, the female experience. And that's where I think we've excelled. Also using teas. So Chinese tea is still the most expensive drink on earth, even more than fine wines, for instance. And the fact that we understand how to use teas adds a complexity to a lot of our drinks. Again, that I'm very proud of, and I will stand behind and enjoy myself. I still enjoy having these drinks 5 years on or 6 years on from creating them.
So should we go to the bar and you make me one and tell me the story?
We can, yes. I would love that.
All right.
So let's start.
How could I have a cocktail of the week without one of Hammant's stories? I couldn't. Here's the tale of the courtesan.
If I were to come into the Royal Court of China as someone who needed a favour, or maybe something quite important politically, for instance, maybe I wanted to trade with a different land, or there was taxation issues, or an argument with a neighbour, etc. How would I resolve this? If I went to any court, but especially the Chinese court, I wouldn't be able to just rock up to the emperor and say, hey matey, sort this out. Within 10 paces I'd be killed, because these people were deities, as it were, and very, very important, with many assassination attempts. So the first thing I'd be the first one. So as anywhere, you'd have to be formally introduced, understand the network, and then the hierarchy and how you could proceed through. So I, as someone who needed something, maybe for my region, my family, something quite important, would need to ingratiate myself with the court. The only way of doing this really is through a courtesan. So there I would be, coming to a courtesan, bearing her gifts, attempting to gain favour. Now, some of these courtesans were so powerful, they could click their fingers and allow me to do this. Yes, you can trade with India. Yes, your family is allowed to do this. Or, yes, the court will provide the money for you to make or have the caravan or make the ships to trade with whoever will allow you. Or they would pave the way for this to happen and maybe act on your behalf to put this, let's say, finance structure or political structure together to allow you to do this. So to go to a courtesan bearing gifts and favours and recommendations and letters and silks maybe and examples of your work, etc., was all part of that process to engage with another person. The issue here was that courtesan was someone very clever, very educated in this field, trained from birth to essentially look after her own interests and those of the people she represented, and to see what she could gain from this deal. What's in it for them, or the court, or the emperor, depending on who she was working for. So it may be that process could last days, weeks, years, even decades. It could be a really fraught process. So all through that time, as someone trying to gain that favour, it wouldn't be simply that I'm there just handing over gifts. I'm giving everything, information, intelligence, all that I can to achieve what I needed to. Now, in that process, even though the courtesan would be there feigning me with hospitality, etc., she's really toying with me, playing with me, finding out, testing what's really there, what's really the truth, what benefit was there. And therefore, I became, as it were, that bird in the cage. So many people consider that the courtesans were that. They were simply sexual objects in the court. And yes, there were some people who were there simply for the privilege of other people, men and women. But when it came to that power struggle, the true basis of any court, then I would really have to somehow win attention and win that person over. So it may take me, for instance, if you're the courtesan, it may take me, as I said, years to get those things flowing, that conversation, that engagement. And one of the things that would happen, I would undoubtedly also fall in love with you. Because here I am meeting someone who is trained in the arts, not only of social engagement, but even in seduction, and would be able to read a person before they even knew what they're thinking, understand them before they would spout a word. So all that is truly almost as a philosopher would, really contemplate how things work. So the problem is, here I am, I need a favour, I'm falling in love, I've spent everything, I'm trying to win attention and make myself part of the court as well, and I need this person to engage me, so I'm using them as an entry point. Now, at one point, imagine after all this hard work and all this effort, that courtesan finally either does what I need that day, that everything's happened, or she kisses me. Whichever one comes first. What would it be like? What do you think it'd be like? Well, I always thought that it's very automatic to think, it'd be a lovely celebratory drink. So you'd have the expressive bubbles of a champagne or a Prosecco to show the excitement, and we're celebrating, yes, I finally achieved it. So yes, we created a drink that starts, as you can see, it starts with this sparkling handmade Prosecco. But there's something else, that when you finally get that kiss, I always imagine that you're tasting the flavour of those cherry red lips. Yeah, so you're there going, oh my gosh, I can taste it. So you're tasting the lips. And we put in a cherry liqueur and a cherry syrup. The liqueur is made by Brioté, so another female maker in France who's created this amazing cherry liqueur. And the cherry syrup is made by Haute de Pont, who makes syrups just outside of London. Amazing syrups, really flavoursome, accurate, true depictions of the fruit in the syrup itself. And I asked her to make the syrup for this drink. And she made a cherry sour syrup, this sour cherry syrup. And it's even gone to win awards, because it's just a phenomenal product. And what it does is what cherries do. Mainly when people think of cherries, they think, oh, cherries, like it's a lollipop. It's not. A cherry is quite a dark fruit. It's got a maturity about it, a complexity, and a darkness that's there. So here I am tasting these cherry lips, but not forgetting that darkness that this person has. And maybe I don't even appreciate it. All I'm thinking, oh, cherry, I finally got my kiss. But underneath is a real darkness that I love about cherries, that sweet, dark flavour, like this woman who's toyed with me, played with me for all that time, manipulated me as if I'm just a toy. And that hopefully will come through. And then we added, in this drink now, we have the Velvet Vintage Vodka by Gabrielle Lethorpe here in London, which is one of the finest vodkas I've ever tasted, really silky smooth, wonderful floral almost flavours. And then together, what you're experiencing in the way we built the drink is first you have the dryness of the Prosecco and slowly gets sweeter and darker and stronger. And as you finish it, you should end up with this incredible sweetness to the drink where it started very dry. And hopefully that's the experience as, let's say, someone gaining favour from a courtesan would have, the way it starts and ends, and also finally getting that kiss. So that's all built into this drink.
It's easy to make this as long as you have the correct ingredients. Make sure you have Blossom's sour cherry syrup, Briote creme de cerise, vintage velvet vodka, and Prosecco Argio Ruggeri. Mix together equal parts of the syrup, the creme de cerise, and the vodka, then slowly add the Prosecco. You should see a ruby red layer and a clear bubbly layer. There you have it. This and all the recipes you hear on the podcast can be found at alushlifemanual.com, where you'll also find all the ingredients in our shop. It was truly a learning experience chatting to Hammant, and let me say, the cocktails were as beautiful as the stories. Thanks to him, I know the true meaning of dim sum. Are you bored senseless when getting a haircut? The only thing to do is catch up on the latest issues of Hello and OK. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but wouldn't sipping cocktails while watching Stranger Things be better? Our next guest, Stu Olafsson, thought the same, and now his idea has come to life in London. Join us next time to see where you can get a cut and color and an old-fashioned. Until next time, bottoms up. Thanks for listening to the Lush Life podcast, the sister of A Lush Life Manual. For more information and links to everything you heard, plus a bit more, please visit alushlifemanual.com. Always remember the wise words of Oscar Wilde. All things in moderation, including moderation. And always drink responsibly. Okay, I said that last part. Theme music is by Steven Shapiro and used with permission. Lush Life is produced by Terra, and I'm your hostess, Susan Schwartz. I'll see you at the bar.